right, welcome to another episode of The Catholic Couple, having fun with faith, family, and friends. I'm your co-host, Bobby Fredrickson, and with me, as always, my beautiful wife,
Katie Fredrickson.
I'm the convert Catholic, and she's the
Cradle Catholic.
And here we are on another episode this week on boundaries.
Oh, what a great...
Everyone's favorite topic.
Yes, I was just going to say that.
It may not be their favorite topic, but it's the thing that most people need to have.
I think
or
that
lack having them.
I think that what we talk about, though, is going to be pretty interesting, especially if you're a parent or if you're not.
Or if you're not, yeah. So let's start with a prayer in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Lord, we thank you for all the gifts that you continue to bless us with. We ask that you be with us in this time for all those who are listening, that they may draw closer to you to help set and enforce these boundaries so that we can be free to do what we ought to do. We ask this through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. All right. Well, it's been a few weeks since we had a podcast, so we figured, hey, why not do something on boundaries?
And it really all came out when we took our dog for a walk/run to this park that was completely fenced area. It wasn't a dog park of
it was like an old softball field.
Yeah. And our son, who's 6, we get there and he's like, this is the freest I've ever been. And he's running around and the dog's running around and he's like, she's so free. Look at her. Because, she would typically have to be on a leash, right? But when he said I can see what he means about the dog, right? Because we don't have a fenced-in backyard. We have to walk her. We have to keep her on a leash. And this was a, special location where she can get off the leash and, yes, run free. But he didn't say she. He said I've never felt so free. And we both looked at each other and we're like, what? But yeah, it kind of had us, because we're dorks, had us have this long, in-depth conversation about the need for boundaries, and especially with kids, and even just into our own lives, that we both, we nerded out and said, this would be a good podcast. So here we are. I hope we can remember the things that we were saying.
Oh, I do,
This was a really
sure.
good conversation. And, in our culture right now that wants to erase all boundaries, right? That wants to say boundaries limit you, or, I don't know, maybe make your own, whatever the flavor of the month is that the culture is cramming down our throats right now, right? That we're losing more and more freedom. And we really are, of what we can and can't do, what we can and can't say, what we can and can't believe out loud, So I think that, I think this is a good topic. I think this is a good topic that we're not realizing how relevant it is and needed it is to have this conversation.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, I also read a book, I don't know, maybe it was last year and a half ago, called Boundaries. I think it sold 5-10 million copies by Dr. Henry Cloud. It's just called Boundaries. And
is it a Christian book, or is it just a secular book with some Christian ideology intertwined in it? Or how was it marketed?
I think it's marketed as just boundaries in general, but it's real Christian. And then there's also some subsets, he made other editions for teenagers, for leaders, for different things, because these principles kind of transfer to all different aspects. And that's what the book goes through. So it's boundaries, within yourself, boundaries with your spouse or significant other, boundaries from work. And especially with the Christian part, there's this part that he goes into, is that as Christians, we feel almost like guilt. If someone asks us to do something, we're like, oh, well, that's the Christian thing to do.
Yeah, I have to say yes.
I have
no
to say
what.
yes. So it goes through a lot of that kind of stuff.
Someone asks me for help, I need to be.
I have to do it.
I have to do
it,
right.
So for the boundaries, I think some of the conversations, I actually made a short Instagram post about it because I thought about it. I was like, it was so insightful that a kid would say that. I'm like, he doesn't even understand. He's quoting G.K. Chesterton or C.S. Lewis. There's all kinds of things, and we'll get into it.
Yeah.
But let's just start first with what's a boundary? What are boundaries for, just in general, and then we can get more into the specifics. So a boundary, when we hear boundaries, what do you think?
Around.
Yeah, like a
fenced in yard.
So
right.
what are boundaries for? Think of it as...
Well, if this is my line, you don't cross it kind of thing.
Yeah, so that would
Like
be
a
more
fenced-in
of
yard.
how it's that would
Maybe
be
because
more
that's
of
the context
practical.
I'm in right
Yeah.
now because of what
So
was
yeah,
said.
let's just back it up first. So a boundary in general would be like, for example, we're in our house. All right, we own the house. Well, the bank still owns it.
We're there. We're all over the
we're
point.
almost
We're
there. We're
getting
getting there. But the bank technically still owns it, but we have a boundary line. So this is the property line. It goes from our house. We have a plot of survey. It's 175 feet long this way, 75 feet this way, and this is our house.
Yeah.
So it sets up. It tells you who is in control of the property. So the boundary says, hey, that's the contentious thing is like, well, the borders or open
Yeah.
borders. So borders are essential, but the way that we need to think about these boundaries, well, number one, from the book. This is Dr. Henry Cloud is the name. We'll link to that. The first one is boundaries are a property line, and it defines lines of ownership. That's the first part. And it tells you who's in control of the property. So who owns it, whose fence, whose house this is, whose property. Second would be that the boundaries is you have freedom to do what you want to do. You have choices. And three would be you are responsible for it. And freedom always comes with responsibility. So obviously, in the context of a house, it's my house, but it's my property. Someone can't just come in and come into my house. They have to knock on the door. I have to let them in. They can't just come in and start squatting, which people do. That's a whole separate thing. But I have freedom to do what I want to my house. I can paint it. I can put up a fence. I can not put up a fence. Katie wants a pool. I choose. We don't need a pool. Those kinds of things.
We don't honor my requests for
I do not.
co-ownership, which I guess we'll have to talk about that later in that freedom segment.
And then, but you're also responsible. So, unlike our neighbor behind us, you have to mow the grass. There's certain ordinances. There's certain ordinances or things that we have to do. We have to pay property taxes. We have to keep the property up. We have to pay for garbage and water and all these other things.
So, with great boundaries comes great responsibility.
Yeah, but this is the thing that what people hear, especially when, not to get political or anything, but when people hear like, the border, like, let's put up a wall on the border. That's fine. It's a wall, but almost every boundary, even if it's a wall, has a gate.
Yeah.
Or some entry point where, yes, there's a wall there now, but the door opens up and I choose who comes in and who comes out. Not to make it political, but for my house, people aren't just coming and going and like open house 24/7.
Yeah.
So that's a big deal.
So within the boundaries that you have, you are free to personalize that, to have that autonomy within your boundaries, right? It gives you that freedom in that sense. And you also within those boundaries have a freedom of saying who and who cannot cross into those boundaries. And let's look at it a completely different way. Let's look at sports. Yeah. There's bounds, there's out of bounds and in bounds. And if we were playing a game, we have to stay within the bounds in order to actually play the game and have fun and do it. Versus if there were no bounds, if there were no boundaries, if there wasn't a court, if there wasn't it wouldn't be, you would run off think about like a little kid not knowing how to play a sport, right? Like they just run off of they take the ball and they run the opposite direction. Well, there goes the whole game for everybody. Like nobody can play. They didn't understand it. Or if the dog got a hold of the ball and then took off. You're not within those boundaries. You're not within the actual place on the field that's designated as the area to play. So again, there is no freedom to be able to play the game, just as there's no freedom to, like you said, paint your house. Because if we didn't have those boundaries set, then we can go over to our neighbor's house and start painting their stuff and like making everything our own. But this is your spot, do it with which you can within means of being responsible, because within those boundaries, if you're playing a game, you can't just like beat somebody up because you didn't like how they played either, so within that.
Yeah. Well, and what's the point of the boundaries of the gate or the wall is to keep what's good in and what's bad out. So, obviously we have a door, we can let people up, but at the end of the night we lock the door. So just in case somebody wanted to break into our house, they stay out or they can't just come in. So it's obviously protection, but we have a door, we have a gate or those kinds of things. But when we put up these walls, it does make us more free. Let's just use the example of our backyard. We have a trampoline. when I was growing up on a trampoline, you're jumping on the trampoline, you got to be careful. It's like you're jumping and flipping and doing the stuff. I don't know how many times I was thrown off or hit the
Yeah.
ground or kids break.
I mean, I've known kids that broke their clavicles by falling off of a trampoline.
But
breaking
now
arms,
every
breaking
trampoline
legs.
has the boundary around it with the
Right,
net.
that
That's the
big
safety
net.
things. And now what do
Right.
the kids do? They're like maniacs, like jumping off the sides and flipping, and like our kids go crazy with it because they have that sense where they know that they're safe, that they can try to jump higher and do another flip, or they can do these different things because they know at the end of the day, and the wall gives a little bit and they can get real close to it, but at the end of the day, they know that they're safe. So boundaries are good in that sense. And that goes back to the original point, is that Braden intuitively knew, like, I'm free because he doesn't have to worry about cars. He doesn't have to worry about
Yeah.
anyone coming in.
Because we also have a corner lot, and you have to think he can't really run that free himself, just like the dog can't. It's not like we don't put our kids on leashes or anything. Like,
Yeah,
don't,
but
don't,
he
don't
just-
judge. But there is a street right next to our house. There is
And
no
it's-
fenced in
and it's
yard, and
pretty-
people
people
blow
kinda-
the stop sign right by it all the time. He's always having to look out for cars. So yeah, you're right. He doesn't have that freedom like he did in that gigantic area to just run free.
But it was fenced in. It wasn't
was
like just an
fenced in.
open field
He
where he's like, "Oh, I'm
knew.
a free. I can just
So
run."
why don't
but he
you
felt
read-
he felt
Yeah.
safe.
You just said you said a while back that he quoted G.K. Chesterton when he said that, and he didn't even know it. Can you read that quote, because that's actually how this whole conversation unfolded. Braden said that. We both kind of looked at each other and again geeked out and had this big deep conversation. And then Bob was like, "Well, this reminds me of a G.K. Chesterton quote," and he like quoted you. I'm like, "Who are we?"
Yeah, from Orthodoxy, which
anyway.
it totally makes sense. So this is
So
the
what's the
quote.
quote? Go
It
ahead.
says, "We might fancy some children playing on a flat, grassy top of a small, tall island in the sea. So long as there's a wall round the cliff's edge, they could fling themselves into every frantic game and make the place the noisiest of nurseries. But the walls were broken down, leaving the naked peril of the precipice. They did not fall over, but when their friends returned to them, they were all huddled in terror in the center of the island, and the song had ceased." From Orthodoxy. So
there's no safe feeling.
there's no safe feeling.
The
So
boundaries
so
give
not
that
only
safety.
not only will they not even get close to the edge, but by the end they're like, "Well, we're not even going to try it. It's just too scary." It's like,
Right.
but when there's a fence or a guardrail, the kids will push all the way up to it.
Oh,
'Cause
yeah, they will.
They will push on it. They will jump up on the fence and kind of hang over, like maybe 1 foot over, and like they're still, but they will push. But they know what their limits are. They know how far that they can push it, but that they'll still kind of be safe. They feel safe.
And I think, and as an educator, that is kind of, before I was a parent even, right? Like before, just being a teacher, I would set a boundary, set a limit, set an expectation, and kids do push it. But then they knew once you set that boundary and you really stayed to it and was consistent, then you could tell, especially the most problem behaviors became more comfortable, at ease in your classroom, actually felt safe to learn in that space because you, as the teacher, this is me talking about how I set up my classroom. I set the expectation, I set the boundaries in place. They pushed it, they challenged my boundaries to see if I was serious about those boundaries. Like, is this for real? Is this really where this limit is? And once they knew where it was, it's like kind of like a relief. You could see where they finally, like, because they pushed it and they kept pushing it. But but the key to that is consistency. If you are a parent, if you're a teacher, if you deal with any kind of people are going to test you. You can say a limit is a limit. You can say a boundary is a boundary. You can set expectations. You can say it all you want, but you're going to feel a push.
Yeah, there's
And
a
if
difference
there's
between just setting boundaries
and actually
and enforcing the boundaries. Yeah,
the
especially if
boundary.
it's not a wall. If it's when we're
Yes.
transitioning into boundaries so we set the table for physical boundaries, but there's also boundaries that in our lives, whether that's teaching in your classroom as parent and child, which we'll get
Behavioral.
into, behavioral relationships,
Yeah.
especially at work with people, work-life balance type stuff, or the expectations of what they
Training a dog.
training
This
what-
dog's like climbing on us still.
Yeah.
This dog knows no boundaries
she's
at
a
all.
stage 5 clinger.
She knows no boundaries. No. I mean, like in general, like she doesn't know yet her boundaries, and that's why she drives me nuts because she doesn't get them, know them, and I have to consistently reinforce that in her, or else she will not get them, and she'll continue to push because she doesn't have
or
them.
or we do. I just thought of a funny boundary story. So I think we do a pretty good job with our children, but a new family moved in on our block. This little kid named Robert.
Well, you don't have to say their real names
Well,
when you
we
do
don't
things
say his
like
last name.
that.
His name is Robert.
I know.
He's
but
a
you
good
could
kid.
For the sake of saving names, you always call people something different.
No
when you
one, no
have
one on
things
the
like that.
podcast is going to know who Robert is. So Robert,
Well, they might.
no one's going to know Robert. So Robert, we just met him. All of a sudden, next thing you know, like he's like playing. He's already like kind of crossing the boundaries with the kids. And then we were upstairs talking. Like he let himself into the house, walked all the way upstairs into our bedroom. It was like in our bedroom, like, hey,
To tattle,
like tattle
about something
like,
that another kid did. Like, woo,
whoa,
this guy
we don't even know
what-"
you. He
But
came, pushed his way to the house and moved up. So he's not used to boundaries being obviously set at his house or other people's houses or regular behavior. So he's like, he pushed obviously in our physical
And he
boundary
pushed
through the
it.
house,
Yeah.
and then not only to the house and said something. He walked up to the stairs and went to our
like,
bedroom.
hello,
hey, hello.
hello
So
there.
hey, it's just so you know.
Well, that just shows, but that was set, and we did have that conversation, and just say, hey, next time, make sure you stay downstairs, and call
Ring the
up or
doorbell,
ring the
knock on the-
doorbell, knock on the door, and but we set the boundary, and he didn't do that again.
didn't do
Again,
it again.
it's just making sure that they know instead of, oh, can you believe it that happened? It's setting an expectation, setting a boundary, and then being consistent in executing that.
Which is the hard part because, the main thing is that it's real easy to tell somebody something like, hey, we're not going to do this, or this is what the boundary is. But the enforcement is the hard part.
Okay, if I could did I already say, I wonder if in a podcast before I've made this, I probably have brought this up about, when you
about me,
like got so mad at the kids, or Avery, that's it, I'm going to come in your room and I'm going to break every toy, or I'm going to give away every toy. And I'm just sitting back like all quiet, like, you better be ready to do all that, because or else she's going to, again, test you. This is what you say. Oh, if you don't do this behavior, if you do this behavior, this is the consequence. You better be ready to follow through on that. So needless to say, Avery did not have all her toys taken away, but Bob knew at that point, yeah, that's not a way to set a boundary. Extremes.
Like I extremely set up boundaries and then
and then didn't enforce them and didn't reinforce it. And so what it does is that actually, in the short term, well, I guess long term too, but in one sense, the kids or the other person you're dealing with thinks, oh, they're not serious. I can't take them serious. So then the next threat, I'm not going to take seriously. So the boundary that you set, I'm not going to take seriously because you don't mean what you say, right? But the other way you could think of it is with kids, is that could violate like a safety thing. Well, I don't know then what's really going to happen, and I don't know what the if it's that can create an anxiety that you're not even knowingly creating, because if you don't have a follow through and something that's a realistic expectation, then anxiety can come out of that, because there is a fear. There's a fear of the unknown, right? That's what boundaries give you, is a known. And that gives you a peace of mind, even if it's something you don't like, right? Like even if it's a boundary you don't like.
Well, let's kind of define what that means, because now we're kind of jumping. So boundaries when it comes to like behavior. I heard. Do you know who Brene Brown is? Have you ever heard of her? Mm-hmm. She's huge. She's done a bunch of. She's got some books. I don't know. She's got like 30 million views on like TED Talks, and she's really, her big thing is she does some boundary stuff, but like vulnerability, relationships.
Brene Brown.
Brene Brown. But she says something about the boundaries, something like a boundary defines what's okay and what's not okay.
Right.
That's basically it. There's the line. This is okay. This is acceptable. This is not acceptable. So especially, with work and our families, with our spouses. I mean, obviously, there's some things that we, just know because our conscience tells us. Obviously, as Catholics, we have the 10 Commandments, we have the Catechism, we have certain moral precepts that we follow. But there's other, just whether that be like, work stuff, whether that's just social interactions with people. Like, hey, it's, when this would be okay. Like, hey, at the workplace, well, we don't hug, we shake hands or we wave, or there's all these kind of weird. Some of these boundaries are kind of hard, especially as we.
You mean hard to navigate?
They're hard to navigate, especially. Especially work stuff. It's usually sometimes it's weird. I mean, with me, it's different. It's all guys. I work with like 35, 40 guys, and we have one.
Well, you have one newer female working there. Do you think she had to set some boundaries and set some expectations
she's
coming in, or felt a need to do that in an all-male workplace?
Well,
I'm just curious, like that.
Well, I know we had a
that
conversation
seems
with
intimidating to me.
before she came. We had a conversation with everybody to make sure that you guys have been real loose. Because it's all guys. Sometimes it's like a locker room and a lot of joking and kidding, and it's like high school, which is fun. We keep it loose for sometimes. Nothing inappropriate, nothing like that. But we definitely it's like, hey guys, make sure you're courteous and nice and. Knock on the door before you go into her office. She has her own office. She has her whole area, so it's cool. But I'm sure it's got to feel kind of weird. But so far she's been there for a month. She's settling nice. She's doing a great job. We're glad to have her. So let's start with boundaries in like a marriage. Obviously, that would be to be faithful to each other.
I'm like thinking, like, what do you mean, like in a relationship?
Yeah, well,
okay,
obviously
being faithful.
Obviously when
I
you
don't know, I'm like, well,
when you get married,
I like to be able to have my free time to watch what I want to watch sometimes. Is that what you mean? I totally didn't even think about that.
In general.
Oh my gosh.
So obviously,
boundaries within the relationship of like lines that we shouldn't ever cross.
Yes.
So,
what's okay and what's not okay.
What's okay and what's not okay. We don't have this in our marriage, but I've heard of a few different marriages where, and actually, I think in all of relevant radio, there's a rule that no male and female alone can ever be in a room together. And I know that we knew some Christians that were very strict on that. And it's not to say because we don't trust, like, it was very, it's nothing to do with trust.
Other people to think.
It has nothing to do with trust, but it has everything to do with, integrity and just making sure that.
There was a famous politician, or Mike Pence.
Oh, is
Mike
he?
Pence, yeah, he's very Christian. He's
same.
from our great state of Indiana. He had the same rule.
The same rule, yeah. And it's not about like I don't trust myself or I don't trust my spouse. It's really just it's a boundary that is set
so
to
there's
respect.
No people to think
respect,
that
right.
Yeah, because what happens is, you're in a room with them and you're meeting like once a week. It's like, oh my, what's going on?
Well,
they seem to be chumming it up.
It's
Next
a boundary
thing you know, rumors start.
Right, it's a boundary from rumors. It's a boundary from gossip. It's a boundary from temptation. To be honest, it's a simple boundary that those, like I said, relevant radio, the whole staff follows that. So it's a boundary set within their workplace that they have to follow. But then there's other marriages that they agreed upon that boundary, and it's just something that they worked out. We don't have that within our own relationship, but I think that's a definition of a boundary that's set that can also be set within a relationship that isn't necessarily for everybody, right? Like doesn't have to be something that everybody does, but it is something that helps that integrity of that relationship and helps it to be.
When I think one of the most important boundaries in marriage and why we have marriage in general is that there's no bailout. There's no trap door, back door, escape route. Is the way that it was meant to be for God. Is what God has joined together, no man can to separate. So,
so there's safety right there.
So it's safety knowing that you're stuck with me and I'm stuck with you.
Safety knowing I'm stuck.
You're stuck. That no matter how much,
I know what you mean.
But what that means is, and
there's a bit of freedom in that.
There is freedom in it,
there's a freedom to fully give of yourself. There's a freedom to be fully vulnerable with that other person
to intimacy.
Because of that.
But what happens is, for example, say you're dating somebody, and as you get, even if you're cohabitating, which obviously don't do that because that's what ends up happening after that never works out. So basically, it's like, okay, well, you get in a big fight. say it's like like a medium fight, like a little fight would be like over dinner or something. But like, say this is like kind of like a big argument. So then what? Then what? It's like, okay, well, we kind of split the rent. It's like, well, can I leave or am I stuck? Or like, we got a dog together or whatever. These kind of weird things. So it's like, okay,
There's some skin in the game.
there's some skin in the game, but there's real easy ways. Well, I can move back with my mom.
really
I can go
out.
here. I can go
Yeah.
there. But say now you're married and you get in a big argument. It's like, okay, well, we got to figure this out.
We got to figure it out.
Sometimes
happy.
sometimes it may take longer to try to figure it out. Sometimes it may be, hey, I need a day to myself to try to think about it, and then we come back and let it cool off, and then we talk about it. But at the end of the day, those little fights don't get so escalated to we're getting divorced and I'm moving out. Not that it doesn't happen, but just knowing that, I know from my experience is that, okay, well, sometimes, yeah, we'll have to step back. We've been blessed to not have really, I can remember one fight in the last like 6 years, 5 years. We've been doing pretty good.
Well, didn't you say if you're not fighting
Well, there also is an equation of good interactions versus bad interactions. It has to be around 11 to 1, because if you don't ever have any negative interactions, that usually means one person's getting their way all the time.
I know who that is.
That would be me. But I let you win 1 out of 11, out of 12. So 11 to 1. So I get 11, you get 1. I'm just joking.
It's not a joke.
It's not a joke. You get plenty. Yeah.
Anyway, we'll fight later about it. Okay, so.
Well, yeah, but we're together.
But there is a safety in knowing that within those arguments, we got to figure it out.
Well, you can. Because if you don't, because, let's put it this way. Those little fights are important, because what happens is if you don't, then it's that knockdown, drag out, huge fight, and everything is blown out of proportion, and everything from all these little slights add up to one big thing. And then it's like, I'm leaving, and then it's like it's like an extreme blow up. So it's like that's the danger, and that's the genius of marriage, is that good times or bad, sickness or health, rich or poor, all these different things can go on. Is that no matter what, love isn't the feeling. It's not, yes, that includes feeling great sometimes, but it's an act of the will that I love you because I'm going to sacrifice.
Well,
I'm going to give of
basically
myself.
what I take you to be, whatever my husband or wife in sickness, health, death, till death do us part. But you're saying rich, poor. You're saying like, I'm not always going to feel like it, but I'm making this commitment. And within that commitment, then is that freedom, like you said, for vulnerability and for closeness without having to have that anxiety or worry of.
Yeah, well, let's just face it. When we make that commitment on our wedding days, it's not when we need to make it. It's like, after the honeymoon phase is over, and then we realize that, hey, the person I'm living with now is a slob, or they have some kind of weird thing that like drives me insane. It's like, okay, it's like, no. There's a reason why we stand up in front of God and pledge it in front of our friends and family, that we vow to love each other until death do us part, that we're doing it in front of our families and friends as witnesses, because we're vowing to this, that we're going to hold to these promises that we give to each other in this sacrament. So, it's like, so when these things do, then we have to figure them out.
Right.
We have to come together and compromise and try to figure each other out in our boundaries. And I think you and myself, we really have figured out a way to make it work in a way that where we don't have to have many boundaries. We have a good understanding. We understand each other, what makes each other tick, what, hey, I need some space sometimes, you need some space. I'm pretty independent, you're pretty independent, you're pretty busy, I'm pretty busy. But we have a good way of making it work together. But that's built on trust. I mean, we built trust over the years, is that, we trust each other. So that can really help us to not have to set so many boundaries. But we know we got,
I think that now I'm like thinking big picture and small picture. There's like big concrete boundaries that God sets for us, right? That gives us the freedom to play the game of life, right? So certain moralities and certain specifics, like the 10 Commandments, are kind of like if we're looking at this as a game, right, are your bounds and the rules of the game, so that no one gets hurt and that we could actually play and be happy playing, right? And then I think about within then relationships and within our own lives and our own self, and how we know what works for us and what we need to do for our own sanity, health, our marriage, our relationships, our juggling it all, that we have to set our own boundaries within that. And those aren't set in stone, and those can change over time depending on your life stages, right? Depending on, like right now, me as a working mother and and wife, and trying to juggle all these things, I need to set boundaries within my job, and I need to set my boundaries within my home, with my children, with my spouse, with the people I work with the people I work for. Like,
Well,
those are all going to be something that I'm in control of, that are subjective to me. But there's just how there's objective truth and subjective truth. I think there's objective boundaries and subjective boundaries, where you have these limits that you create because you know what you need in your life at the moment you need them. But there's also always those boundaries that God put in place that really you can't change. And I think that there's do you see what I'm trying to go for with
No,
that?
I do,
That there's just so many different layers and levels to these things, but still understanding the underlying thing of, when we set a certain boundary, whether God sets it or we set it, there's a certain element of freedom that comes along with that. That the whole purpose of it
it's
is
not
to
always
give
freedom.
a freedom.
It's not always freedom from, but freedom for. That those boundaries create not just that,
Right.
that we're free to do what we ought. That's what it's about. And what was the reading from this last Sunday? The second reading was Galatians. What did it say? Something. Freedom. God gave us freedom so that we could be free, not that to not go back to be a slave to our flesh, because that's what. In a Christian way, is that with this boundaries and this freedom, that Jesus died for us so that we are no longer slave to sin, so that we are free,
Right.
not from things, but to be free to make decisions, not out of
Right.
fear, but out of love, for what's best for us, for what's
So-
good for us. That freedom is to do what we ought to do. So we don't have anything controlling us. That's what sin is. Sin is controlling us. Those are the bad habits. These are the anger, the short temper, all these things. So when we have a true freedom that Christ gives us, who, if the Son set you free, you're truly free indeed. But free for what? Free to do whatever you want? No, that's license. But free to love, to serve, and to know. So then, if we're free from drugs or alcohol or these other addictions,
Or
hold us up.
busyness.
Busyness.
Honestly, or busyness.
Yeah, then we're not free to do what we ought.
Right.
We're a slave to the job, or you're a slave to a boss, or slave to a sport.
You could even be a slave to your own family, and there
That
has
too.
to be
There has to be a
mom has to be
balance.
able to say, you know what, I'm gonna go and do something just by myself and take some time. That is saying
Freedom for your own
freedom
sanity.
for your own sanity. Not
There has to
freedom
be
from.
there
Right.
has to be absent to enjoy something. If you're always there, then it's just all encompassing. Then you can never really. You need to take a step back to sometimes to be able to get that contrast.
Yeah.
If there's no dark, then the light, you don't understand it. So there has to be that contrast.
Right.
So yeah, when we're alone, and sometimes we need that to recharge or to pray or to be. But you can't stay up on the mountain all the time, and then you got to come back. And then
Yep.
when you come back, it's like, oh, okay, well, now I appreciate it, and that's part of it, I think.
Now, we did talk about at the beginning, I think way earlier when we were talking about boundaries, we said something about how as Christians we think we have to be yes men, really, right? Like, yes, we're always going to show up to the thing. We're going to, if someone needs our help, we have to be able to say yes to every little thing. I think that establishing boundaries, sometimes if we're too rigid within them, we're not allowing ourselves that freedom or that open spaces to be there for someone. So I think that should be within it as well. Like, you know where you're called to be there for someone, and actually create room within your life to be there when someone needs you. That is something that, when you create a boundary, let's say a work and a home boundary, you're allowing yourself to be open to the people that do need you at home, or vice versa, within your schedule. Just really making sure that it's not saying that you have to be there for everybody all of the time, but it's also saying that you can't be so boundaried up that you cut off any
Well,
opportunities
well,
for being open.
I think the trick for that is that when those boundaries are set for work and life, is that when you're at work, you're at work, and when you're at home, you're at home. When you have that cross between the both, then you never actually get both because they're blended into both areas. So when you're at work, so a good boundary, for you, I know you'd set when you originally started this year, you set some good boundaries like after 5 o'clock that, unless it's emergency or this or that, then you're not
That
going
I'm
to
not going to
you're not
answer
going
an
to answer
email.
emails and
Not
stuff
going to
like
answer
that.
an email until the next day morning during school hours. Yes, I did say that. But I think it could go another way that what if there was a crisis and a dear friend or my mom or someone had to get a hold of me while I was at work. I still need to make some room I don't need to be so rigid
98% of the time. But yeah, you have that be able to do that.
Right.
But and that's the same time, because if you don't do that, what ends up happening? Okay, say now you're at home and you're thinking about work. Well, I got to do this. I got to do this.
Yeah.
I know you're real rigid when it comes to like you can't relax unless the house is clean.
Right.
So that's like your thing. So
Where
it's
everything's put away at least.
yeah. So
Can't
it's
sit
like
on the couch.
you like things in their place and the boundaries and to where they're supposed to be, so that you can focus and be present and be at home. If not, or same with your work. You like to try to get as much as of it you can done at school before you come home, so you can engage and be present to your family.
Before this new position, when I was teaching, I had a very strict work was at work and home was at home. And I never brought my grading home. I got myself to a really good place where I got into a really good routine and did work at work and home at home. I set those and it was so great.
Yeah, that makes two of us now. Now I'm on call and thinking about work all the time. So
and maybe I think that's why it's been so difficult for me. This has been very difficult for me. And I think it's because I was at that place and I enjoyed that freedom of when I'm at home, I concentrate on my home. And when I'm at work, I concentrate on my work. But now my kids come to work with me and I have to be a little bit more available at home when I'm at home and do work at home. Yeah. So this has been very hard because
it's a difficult
there are
transition.
and I took a long time this school year trying to establish boundaries for our kids and it was very difficult for them to understand because it's every day when every day is bring your kid to work day. It's a very different it's like two universes colliding
at once.
And
so
it
like, feels
oh
like they're overlapping. Those boundaries are on top of each other.
And I felt no freedom to get work done, and I felt no freedom to parent because I had two things colliding at once. So it is a very difficult when you do have your expectations and what you and we've probably said the word boundary like 30 times in this episode. We should probably next time when you listen to it, you should sit there and mark it. We've said it. So when you have these things in place, you really are free. You really are, because you've like when I would set even within routines are setting boundaries for yourself. Like I'm only going to work out. I'm going to work out on these days. Then I don't have to worry about I'm trying to squeeze in this time. But I did it. I'm designating specific days for this day. I go to the gym, for example. So I think boundaries and routines can go hand in hand as well. Can help you to reinforce them anyway.
Well, I think the thing too with boundaries is that where the edge is at.
Tally. We've at least said it 32 times.
Well, that's fine. Well, this kind of goes to the point of like just say like you talked about sports. Just say you're playing like a musical instrument. Now there are certain scales. There are different I played the trumpet when I was in grade school, so you had to know the scales, and there's different different ways to play the instrument. If I just played it any way that I want, then But once I got the basics down of like, hey, how the trumpet works, what are the basic scales, what's bass clef, treble clef, all these kinds of things, I kind of know those, then I'm free to improvise. Once I know the basics, or if just use the sports analogy. So you play basketball or baseball or football. Once you get the rules down, once you get the basic movements like how to dribble, how to shoot, then you can be freer to do one-handed shots or hook shots or dunks or turnaround jumpers or crossovers. You could do all these different things. But if you don't do those basics first, don't know the outlines and the boundaries, then you can't expand on those basic things.
And it's overwhelming. If you have to think you have to do something from scratch.
Yes.
Think about if you were just go to a soccer field and you don't know how to play soccer, but you look at a gigantic field with 2 nets and you just try to make it up as you go along. It's overwhelming. That's not, I guess you could get a little creative after a while. But then how do you
then
play
the rules
with
change.
Then you have to bring
if you don't
somebody
know
else
what the
in on it.
And if you don't know what the
And
rules are, then
right.
it's like playing a game with a kid, like our kids. If they make up a game, it's like all of a sudden there's another rule. Oh, you didn't know that? Well, we could do this. And they just keep adding rules. And,
Right.
and then it turns into chaos, and one kid gets mad, and then he quits.
Right.
Because there has to be also an agreement
an agreed
on the
upon
boundaries. There has to be.
Right.
So if only one person is keeps changing the boundaries then to suit themselves, then that's not fair.
Right.
And then people know that it's not fair.
And it's just interesting how we can look at this in a small picture, and then we can look at it as a bigger picture. So if you look at morality and God's boundaries that He set for humanity, which is the 10 Commandments, and those 3 commandments are the first 3 are us and God, and the other 4 through 10 are us and others. And if we really followed that right, you can see it gives us peace with God and ourselves in those first 3, and then peace with others and help and community in the other 6, 7. No, 7. Hello, count right. Okay, but what I'm saying is it reverberates when you're in that, when you're within those lines.
When you put the first things first and the other things go,
Right.
If you get right with God, then you're right with yourself. Then you are free to be right with other people. But if you don't get that first,
theirs too, that affects
Of
their
course.
freedom. Think
Of
about
course.
what a lot of when we go against the boundaries God has set, it does infringe on other people's freedom as well. The most obvious is thou shalt not kill, right? So it's definitely infringing on someone else's freedom if you kill them. But even theft, lying, adultery, cheating, all these things that do wound relationships, hurt relationships, or just hurt others in general, that cry for justice, that is something that strips someone else of their dignity, of their worth, of their own things, of their property. All those things affect their freedom, affect their life, affect their happiness. And if you really think about if everyone followed the boundaries God set, that's harmony, that's peace, that's community, and that essentially gives everyone that freedom to live the life that God's called them to live.
Yeah, and that's part of what the issue is right now, is that basic fundamental boundary or precepts or thing that held everybody together. That's what the word religion literally means, is to bind together. That religion is to bind people together, to bring us together, to be in communion. But when we don't have any unifying principle, whether that be religion or patriotism in a country, and
or just a basic morality, it doesn't have to be a specific religion, follow all these different precepts of a religion, but a basic underlying morality that Judean Christian morals were what this country was founded on.
Not just this country, every Western society, and
Right.
everything of things that we just take for granted, that just, you always talk about inherent dignity. Well, if we didn't have Christianity, that it wasn't a thing. That isn't a thing without Christ.
Yeah.
It just wasn't.
Right.
So, but if we can't agree on those things, that if, the relativism and all these different things, when these binding principles, this religion that holds us together, then we become splintered, we become fractional, we become so divergent that we become divisive, that we're so separated because we can't agree on the basic things, that we can't even agree on basic things now. It's like, well, because there's no overarching thing at all. It's like,
Right.
and that goes with our country,
No
with
commonality.
with left and right. It's like, well, if we can't agree just on the founding documents of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, it's like, okay, well, that should be first. Like, hey, we're all Americans. We're all, whatever. You can have your opinion, I can mine, but there's one thing that's holding us all together. Where we salute the same flag. So when we're like, well, the flag's racist, and you can go all this like, well, okay, well, we're not even. There's nothing to holding us together if so many people are falling away from religion. Religion is what always held these communities together. That there's a now we always say, well, people don't even know anyone on their own block, and they don't really know anybody. It's like, well, there's nothing binding us together. There's nothing other than we live on the same block. I do what I do. I don't know who you are. You stay on your side of the fence.
Shut your garage door.
Yeah.
And go.
So when the boundaries become so staunch that people never cross over those boundaries to see their neighbor, then that becomes an issue.
In little individualized.
Yeah. And boundary, and this is funny because the way that God envisioned, do you know what the word paradise actually means?
No.
It means a walled garden. That God originally that's what Eden was. It was it's a mountaintop on top of a garden. It's a walled garden. It's like you were safe. But doesn't mean that it's just brick walls, that there's always a gate. Jesus said, I am the gate.
Yeah.
So Jesus himself is saying, okay, you need fences and you need walls, but you also need a gate. And I am the gate. And no one gets to the Father except through me. That you got to go through me, So it's interesting that, for me, I like boundaries in like a practical, like individual way. Like I was talking about it the other day. It's like I'm like that weird guy. Like I like to plate with like on Thanksgiving where you get all the separate plates. Like I like all
I
my.
like to put it all together.
I like see. Well, that has to do with personality.
I like a good famous bowl from KFC. I like to mix it all.
See,
together.
I think a lot of it has to do with your personality. Like people who lean more conservative or more liberal, people who are more conservative, it's that people who are conservative are more orderly, that they love the boundaries, that they like that rigidness of that. Hey,
but that's what I mean. You don't want to get too rigid within them.
Well, this is where I was going with it. Well, that's the both and of our faith. So when things are rigid, we know what to expect. We know what our laws are, what are the rules. But when that becomes bad is when that becomes fossilized, when it becomes so staunch, or like, well, we've always done things this way. That's the only way that we're going to do them. And then, however, time is marching on. Things do change. Not everything in our faith, most of the things, 90% of the things are stuck in stone and they're not moving and we can't change. However, how we worship some things or how we prefer to do things, that isn't set in stone. There are some changes and some things that people prefer. But at the end of the day, I know for me, as I've gotten older, I'm able to see the both sides that, hey, yes, I do like that some things are rigid, but where all the growth set are outside those boundaries. That's right. Like in any story, it's like the hero story. The hero leaves the safety of the castle or the place or the Shire in the Lord of the Rings, and they go out and they go to the unknown, and this is where the adventure is at. And then what do? They go to outside the boundaries and they bring something back, the gold or the knowledge or whatever they need, but they bring it back to the community. So that's part of where the balance comes in. The boundaries are necessary, but there's also times where we know how far we got to go, but there's sometimes, things change that you need to go out. That's what we say, think outside the box. What does that mean? That means there's a box the way that everyone's always done everything, but we need a new idea. We need something different to make this work. So we have to be flexible to be able to.
That's what I mean about there's objective and subjective truth. There's objective and subjective.
We don't compromise. We don't compromise on the primary things that are objective.
But but the boundaries that I have now, the boundaries that I'm setting as a mother of kids that are 9 and 6 years old and a new job that I'm just starting to fully get my feet set in stone and things like that. Those boundaries aren't going to be the same in 5 years that I need to set. I'm going to have to again be able to branch out and
Yeah,
be
but you're
creative
flexible
and be
enough to be able
flexible and be able to change
yeah,
those
but if
things.
some people are like, well, I never do that ever,
Yeah,
because
right,
people
right,
get like that. But
right.
then there's also the flip side where some people have zero boundaries and it's like, well, I'll do whatever I want when I want to do it, and
Right.
and then what happens? You have chaos. So there's definitely a balance in between, a both and of this tension, because sometimes we have to go out of the boundaries, not to break the laws, but like what I always like to say is, I don't break the
I like
laws.
to bend the rules.
I like to break the
don't.
rules.
I do not.
Yeah, but anyone who's ever invented anything, anybody who's ever did something new, reinvented the wheel, or did move something out, the same thing they always said. Well, automobiles, are you crazy? We're always going to have the horse, or any of these. Like, what do you mean, that internet thing? What are they going to do with that box?
Yeah.
It's like, what do you mean, the internet?
Yeah.
But those
Yeah, there's definitely room for creativity and
creativity,
ingenuity and,
people more artistic.
again, like you said, thinking outside the box.
Yes,
But there's a box.
there's a box. So
It gives a freedom to be able to think outside of it if the
Yes.
box exists. If
And
there
to be
isn't one, then we can't think outside of anything. And again, it gives no
when
it
when
gives
when there's unlimited options, that is no freedom either. When you have
right.
1,000
You're
things to
paralyzed
pick,
by
you're paralyzed by
choice.
choice.
Yes.
That you can't actually choose what's going.
Yes.
Exactly. But blessed are the flexible, for they will not be bent out of shape. That's one that I like.
I like that.
see.
I never heard that one.
Put that on a T-shirt.
I like that. I like that a lot.
Because it's true.
Blessed are the flexible, for they. I really
They
like
will
that.
not be bent out of shape, because
I think that
we
needs
have
to be, yeah.
we have to be
Yeah.
flexible sometimes in the things that need to be flexible, but there's some things that are set in stone. That's why they say set in stone. The 10 Commandments were set in
stone.
There were
not
no
rubber bands.
They were not editable. There's no whiteout on that. All right.
Yeah.
They may have cracked it the first time, but they went back up and bang, 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 bang.
And to go be full circle, when you spoke about things like marriage and having those boundaries within marriage, and then these morality that are set in stone within, like the 10 Commandments, for example, that's a pure freedom to love.
Freedom
right
for.
there. It's freedom for love, being able to, not freedom from anything, it's freedom
Not freedom
for,
out of fear,
freedom
but
out of fear.
but freedom
Yeah.
for love,
It's when
which
you,
is which love is a free choice.
right.
You're free to love. If not, you're like, I
Within
have to,
those
I have
boundaries.
to, or else, instead of I get to because I know I'm safe and then that I'm not going
I
to be
know
hurt.
I'm safe. I'm not going to be hurt. I can take down my own walls and be able to be vulnerable because of that, of those boundaries that I'm playing within, that my spouse is playing within, that might, yeah.
Well, let's shift, because we're already at over 50 minutes. So what about like boundaries with kids? What are some boundaries that are necessary that you've seen, not just in your classroom, but whether that's parenting or things that we do that's important, especially, for younger kids? Like you said, we got 6 and 9. Obviously, as they get older, it's going to be different type of boundary stuff with cell phones and
I think
curfews.
consistency is everything. If you're going to set a boundary with a child, like no TV during, like how we kind of set, I guess what we did this summer could be considered a boundary, right?
Sure.
Like there's no TV if it's nice. We had the kids help too. No TV unless it's raining or half hour before bed during the summertime.
Yeah,
And they
so
have to
we're
read
encouraging them,
Yeah,
not because we're being
screens.
we're not just freedom from, but freedom for, to be
So
able to be a
those-
kid and go
right,
outside and
go
play.
outside and play.
And when it's
That's
not
the
nice
freedom
outside, then
for
we
part.
find things to do inside.
Right. And that can't happen unless there's consistency. So you can't set a boundary and not follow it.
So boundaries we set for technology and
So
TV is a big
boundary
deal.
is screen time.
For us, a big
time
deal.
Boundary.
And it was funny because the couple we were with, they're like, oh, it's like, well, how do you do that? It's like, well, you have to just be consistent. You got to stick with it. It's like,
Do what you're gonna.
yeah,
say.
you gotta say what you mean and mean what you say, and that's the hard part, because what happens when a kid doesn't get their way?
They ask 1,000 times.
They're the best salespeople. They take.
But
I'm
that's
not
another
gonna take
boundary
no
that
for an
was-
answer.
you know
I'm
what's
not
the
going to
be-
take no for an answer.
I think the best boundary we've ever set was don't ask us again. Because there's a bigger consequence once you hear that no means no.
And if
That's
you
the biggest
ask in a
boundary
different
that
way
you
and
could
beg
set.
and plead, and then
And
you're
if you
definitely
ask,
not getting
if
it.
no, that's not it either. No, it's no means no. If you ask me, you're still going to get no, but you're going to get a consequence because I said no.
Yeah, now you're
And that's
disrespecting
it.
it.
Now you're disrespecting my no. No, you can't ask me a second time because you're telling me that what that
The boundary I set
the
isn't good for
boundary
you.
I no, well, not just that you don't trust me, you don't believe me,
You don't respect
that
me.
my word doesn't hold any weight with you.
Yeah.
The fact that you asked me several times, and I think having real like I think our kids are at an age where we can have those kind of raw conversations. So if I say no to something and immediately Avery's reaction is but, and I'll just stop and I'll say, do you really want to ask me again? Because I've said no. So do you want to go there kind of thing? Like, because we've had the conversation. When you ask me again, this is what that means to me. So it was kind of like a 1 minute reprimand, you know, like when you ask me multiple times for the thing I said no for, it makes me feel disrespected, unheard, very frustrated because my no is no. And so what that tells me is you don't trust my no, you don't acknowledge my no, you don't believe my no, you think you can ask me a bunch of times to change it, and all that's going to do is give you a frustrated me who's really angry and then wants to give you a consequence.
You do a way better job of controlling that. Me, I don't know if it's men in general, because I've heard a couple other dads talk about it, is that men, I get like kind of like a visceral, like an anger. Like that builds up like when they don't listen or don't follow what I'm supposed to do. And I guess when I'm honest, I get down to the heart of it. It isn't that they're just not listening. It's like, I guess I feel disrespected. It's like you don't trust me, you don't believe me, you think, whatever that may be. Whenever a kid kind of disobeys, there's something, that I don't know.
That you take personally?
Yeah,
But you just said it, though, at the very beginning that then the G.K. Chesterton quote is that kids are going to push their boundaries and they're going to, what did you say? One kid's going to put their leg over the fence and they're going to look over it and they're going to keep pushing. But you have to be consistent if you want to set that boundary and set the no.
Yeah.
Let your no mean your no and your yes mean your yes. Because
It
that
takes-
goes on the
and-
other side of it. That if you tell them yes, you'll go, like, Mom, can we go to the park today? Yes, we'll go to the park today. Oh, they won't let you forget that. And if you don't,
and if your yes doesn't mean yes,
doesn't mean your yes,
then they won't take that serious.
well, not
either.
just that, they don't trust you.
Yeah.
They don't trust what you say. Like, I remember Braden, I said sometime, I think one day I said maybe or something about something that he said. And oh no. When I wrote that we were going to have Mexican meatloaf on a random Tuesday, I have this menu and I write down what every meal is for the week so that I purchase the things for those meals and I make those, it just makes life so much easier. Again, to me, that's a boundary. I don't know. Maybe we're loosely defining boundaries now at this point. But to me, it lets me know what I'm making when.
Lets everybody know.
And it lets
What's for
everybody know
dinner.
what's for dinner. So I didn't make it on that Tuesday. I made something else. And I literally got accused of being a liar by our 6-year-old. You lied. You said Mexican meatloaf. So again, they're looking for consistency. They're looking for you saying
what you say is gonna do
what
is
you
what's gonna
say
be.
is what's going to be. And that means everything to setting boundaries with kids, period. There is no magic formula. It's if you're going to say something, follow through.
Yeah, and I think that's what's going on with myself and my new role at work is that the previous bosses and stuff that were doing stuff was always they would set these rules and then they would enforce them for about a week. They would for about a week or two. And then after the 2 weeks, it was like, okay, you can't come back in till 10.
That's a classic teacher mistake. That what you set in August, you don't follow through in November because that's when the kids push it. They push it again in November,
this would
and then
last,
they push it
this
again
would last
in
2 weeks.
February.
This would last 2 weeks, and
Yeah.
then it would be back to the way it was. Well, because it's a lot of work. Because people will continually push.
ton of work.
They don't stop pushing.
Boundaries get pushed on a regular basis. It's
Yes.
not like and kids do it, adults do it. People push it, but the more you
the more they see that it's stiff,
then it
and you're not
gives
bending.
them the freedom to do something else that is, it gives you the freedom and them the freedom to, like what you said, freedom for something else.
So now
So,
that
like in that case,
we've been
freedom for work.
we've been reinforcing them over and over again, and people get mad because they're used to one way, and that like, when they push up
I like
against it
that.
and
I
they
like
get
the
that
idea.
push.
Yeah, I like the idea of saying what a boundary is. So a boundary is something that's set. What did that one lady
Brene
just
Brown
say?
said
Yeah.
it's what's okay
What's
and what's
okay and
not
what's
okay.
not okay. And within that what's okay and what's not okay, you are giving the freedom for something else. So if you're a
Yes.
teacher and you're setting a boundary in your classroom for your students, you are essentially giving them freedom for learning. Because if you have set these expectations for them and you
Because you're getting
have
rid of the bad behavior, so
you're-
the other kids can
the
learn. Yeah,
elimination of distractions and things like
that makes
that.
sense.
And I think that a lot of times it's really important when you're setting boundaries to explain why you're setting that in the first place. Because sometimes it can sound, like sometimes someone else that you're setting it might not fully understand, but if you explain the reasoning behind that, there's more buy-in to understanding why follow it in the first place, right? Taking pictures of the dog while she's sitting on you.
Yes, she is always
No
in-
boundaries. This dog knows.
This
no
dog
boundaries.
knows zero boundaries. She's in my lap during every podcast now. She's the official show mascot. We just gotta embrace it.
Extreme eye roll.
Yes.
Um,
So
So
with
anyway,
so with children, so
I
big thing
think
with
that-
boundaries are behavior. So what's okay, what's not okay, especially as a teacher or an administrator, is that okay? There's a rule book. There's stuff set in, and then once you get those things down, and from your experience as a teacher, I did it for 1 year, and I wasn't
So-
good at it. This is not my.
Okay.
I've never been really
So
good at.
here's a good example
following
of
it.
good boundary setting. So you have teachers, you go into their classrooms, and you see students at centers, and this group is doing independent, doing this. This group is doing a group work together, having discussions. Another group is at a table with the teacher, and the teacher's reteaching them, and then they'll time them and they'll go to those different stations. If you didn't establish boundaries, it's chaos and those kids are not learning. Those kids are just talking with their friends, throwing stuff across the room, not doing their work if you don't. So you can go in there and see, wow, this teacher has established expectations, has told kids the boundaries, and there are consequences if those boundaries are pushed or crossed, because clearly these kids know what's expected of them, and they have a freedom for learning, for discussion, they know what's expected of them, and they do it.
And they know what happens if you don't. That's a big
yeah,
deal.
but it's so much more about what.
That's the fear part.
That's the fear part, but
but
there's
that's
so
the
much
basic
more
to
it.
know that.
That's so much more
But
to it.
if
That's
you
how
don't,
you start.
But if you don't, yeah, that's how you start. That's
but
the
I'm
fear
talking
first.
about the end result. The end result is.
But if you
I
don't
know
give
what's
somebody that
expected of
consequence, or you make example of someone, you
You
have
gotta do that. But I know I know what is expected of me, and I'm gonna rise to the occasion. It's such a huge booster for esteem if you have that kind of. You have someone believes in you. They have expectations. They've set those expectations for you, and they've given you the tools to meet them. That's huge especially for kids, especially for the most vulnerable kids, especially for kids who have no boundaries within their own home. That's why so many times we'll hear these loaded, horrible debates about if schools should be, raising kids, right? Well, in some communities, that's the only boundaries they'll have. That's the only place that they're going to feel safe because they
Because there
have
are
those
boundaries.
boundaries there, because they go home and they run the show, or they are, maybe both parents work and there's no boundary set because the kid's home alone. There's so many different things, and those kids look to schools sometimes as a place that sets those expectations and those boundaries for them, that gives them that feeling of safety and belonging. So there's just so much more to it when you have that.
So then we
Making chaos
We
out of-
covered some work. We covered some children. So the last one would be, because we're the Catholic couple, on like what would a boundary look like? Obviously, majority. What is it like? the 80-20 rule. So 20% of people do 80% of the work. But Matthew Kelly's research said that it's like 7% of people do 80% of the work in church life.
Oh, for sure.
But
That's true.
people who are, trying to be disciples and trying to do this, is that then once you start getting involved in the church, then people ask you to help and do different things. But I think for me, as I've matured in this process of trying to become a disciple and maintaining being that, is that we also have to know to say, to be free from. So if we say no to one thing, so that we're free for something else. Because sometimes it's like in the church, the way that we get volunteers is we just ask people and they say yes, instead of discerning or asking
Right.
God, is this what you want me to do?
And
Is this a good
it my
resource of my
gift?
time? Is
Just
this,
because someone asks me to do something, does it mean that it is my gift? Is this
And it
something
doesn't-
that I can actually be fruitful with, do
That's it.
well
That's
in?
the big part.
Is it going to rob me of my joy and bring added stress? Then I'm
and
not
then
able
you-
to be the mom I'm supposed to be, the wife I'm supposed
or
to be.
you're not going to be if you're getting
Or
asked to do it at church,
whatever
that
I'm
whatever
being
person you're going to be with, they may not be
what
good
I'm
for
being
the
asked
role.
to do. Am I going to be good
You may
doing
turn
it? It
maybe
might be
more
bad.
harm. Yeah.
Right. So
And that's for so long we didn't talk about these things like discerning, like not just gifts but charisms. And charisms is a gift of the Holy Spirit that is used for other people. It's just like, yeah, well, no, we just need a warm. You got a breath, or a warm body. Do you want to do it? You can do it. It's one thing, okay, like setting up or moving things and doing something like that, but more like spiritual thing, or like working in small groups, or leading ministries, or doing different things like that. Sometimes we just, hey, whoever volunteers, go ahead, take that person. But as someone who's trying to, try to go deeper, is that, it's like we have to also be free to say no. And it's kind of weird because you feel like, oh, I'm letting someone down, because I've been recently asked to do something. I'm like, no,
and you discerned that.
I
and you
discerned
prayed
it and I thought about it, and
sometimes-
and it just so happens I got a different job and I'm way more busier. But it wasn't something that I was. I was good at it. I think I was, but I preferred it. Whatever, I was doing online stuff, but I preferred more to be an in-person kind of guy. It's just
Right.
It just wasn't for me. It just wasn't, and I helped out. But when he asked me again to do it, I'm like, to be honest, I just don't want to do it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that took a lot for me to like set a boundary, to pray about it, think about it, because I didn't want to leave them, with nobody. And I do like I like the program and I like all this stuff, but it's
I
just
think
like,
that you just in moments like that, you definitely need to pray and discern, and it's not all just a knee-jerk reaction.
But I think that the main part of boundaries is that even just because you're a Christian and it's in the context of a church, that just because they ask you, you can still say no.
I'd say that's true in other relationships as well. So there's mom guilt, and then there's the guilt of, you barely get to see your friends as it is. So every birthday party of their kids, every function that your friends have, you feel this really big guilt if you don't go to everything. And I had to do that a long time ago, where I just had to tell myself, I can't do it all. I can't go to every party. I can't go to every birthday party. I can't go to every dinner. I can't go to every outing. I can't go to every girls' event. Yes, I do need to make time for those things, but I absolutely cannot say yes to every single event.
Because if you don't set those boundaries, then ultimately, then there's no time at all for.
It doesn't give me any freedom to do the things that I either need to do or also would like to do. However, like when I had to take on a lot of my master's schoolwork, just within these last few years of school, I felt like
you set that boundary off the
had
rip.
to say it out loud to everybody, just so everybody knows. And obviously, I over dramatized it and I made it funny, like a weirdo. Like, well, you're never gonna see me again, and happy birthday, and I love you. But in all honesty, I would say things to my friends like, I just want to say this out loud to you right now. I don't know what I can make and what I can't. I'm going to be extremely overwhelmed, and and I said, but I do appreciate the invite, just because nobody
You
wants
still want
to
to be
not
invited.
still want to be included, but just know I'm probably going to tell you no. And I still got invited to events. There were some things that I made that I didn't think I would make, and that actually made I think those people feel like, oh wow, she made it. Even though she says she's like
Even
the
though she's
busiest
so
human on the
busy.
planet right
Yeah,
now.
right.
You know, but just saying it out loud again, you can't set it without kind of giving some reasons behind it, so that you still want to be charitable. You still want to be kind. You still want to explain your reasoning sometimes to have a buy-in, or else sometimes people will just be like, "Oh, come on. Oh, come on. No, come on. Just want. Where if you set a boundary and kind of give a little bit of a reason behind what that is, it's a little bit easier to enforce and to follow through, and to maybe even blur sometimes, when you have that chance.
Well, I think that's we've exhausted a lot of this. So
And
from
I
from
dare
individual.
you to count when you
No,
listen
I
to
don't
this
have time
next
to
one.
do that. I'll listen to it. But
I wanna know how
I don't
many
have time
times
to
the word
tally.
boundary.
I'm like
has been
driving.
used.
Usually, when I listen to our podcast, I listen to it
Oh,
just
while
to
you're
make
driving.
sure.
Well,
Yeah,
you
while I'm
could
driving.
count with your fingers while you're driving.
I could.
I'm just
but
curious.
not
I'm gonna guess.
say like
I'm gonna
50
guess.
times at least.
Oh, okay, I was gonna go lower. I was gonna let's say like 38, 39.
I don't know.
I'm
Maybe.
gonna say that's what is that called, an over under or whatever? I'm
It
gonna
is
say
called an over under.
I'm gonna
Yes,
say
very good.
39. I don't want to go over 40.
Okay, really,
Yeah.
very close. So just a basic. I mean, if you're interested in this topic, there's all kinds of people that you can check out. Like I said, we'll share the links in the
Well,
in the
I'm
podcast
going to share a
notes,
link to the
book,
TED Talk and the book.
and the
Those
TED
are the
Talk
two
and the
things.
book. Yeah,
Yeah.
and then in there and then that Dr. Henry Cloud's got a couple other books. He's got some YouTube stuff. He's got a YouTube channel. Brene Brown she's pretty big. She's got a ton of stuff out there.
Cool.
And G.K. Chesterton quote was from Orthodoxy.
It's for your sanity.
That's it. With
Mm-hmm.
with boundaries, like the main part is what we're trying to say is that it's freedom for things that you can do by setting up.
And sometimes it's freedom for rest. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be that there's an action
God
involved.
set the boundary that
yeah, you just said about
6
look at
days.
that 10 Commandments again.
6 days, 1 day rest.
It's not like to follow a rule like I can't do anything on Sundays. No, you shouldn't. You should be resting. And yeah, we shouldn't have power washed the driveway yesterday. We should have been resting because I'm exhausted today because I didn't follow
tricked you into it.
God's boundary.
I tricked Katie into power washing. I'm like, ooh, you should
Power
try
washing
this. This is fun.
is very relaxing.
I told you it was really relaxing, and I
But
knew that you couldn't
I
stop till it was done.
I
so,
couldn't stop.
but I had other things I had to do.
I was exhausted. Though, and
Speaking
I
of
still was
freedom, I know we had to
exhausted.
get ready for Freedom's Eve, the party that we
Well,
have
that's why
every
this
year
is
for
a
4th
good-
of July.
I think I'm going to call this episode "Boundaries Equal Freedom?" Question mark. What?
I like more of discipline equals freedom. That's the other one, and that
Yeah, but within discipline are boundaries in itself.
Exactly,
Oh my
like, hey,
gosh,
discipline
I think I'm
is
going
all
over my over under. I probably should
discipline
be at
is all
41.
boundaries. It's like, hey,
Ah,
you
there
can't
goes
eat
the word
this.
boundary
You have to
again.
do that. There are all these kind of rules that are kind of built in there. You build these boundaries.
Discipline builds boundaries,
Discipline equals freedom.
or discipline is
Helps set up boundaries.
No,
and
helps them be consistent.
Well, they become
which
habits.
is necessary for how they
becomes habits,
become.
but you have to
yeah.
first set up these guidelines.
All right, we'll wrap it up. That's another episode. See, we're dorks. Look at what we talk. This is like random conversation too.
All spurred on by our son saying, "Man, I'm free out here in this field with a fence." So you got a whole episode. Thanks, Brado. We appreciate you,
thanks,
buddy.
Braden, for
All
your
right, well, let's
astute
bring it on home,
observation.
and in the name of the Father and the Son and Holy Spirit. Glory be to the Father and to the Son and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you for listening. If you could, like us on Instagram, The Catholic Couple One, and subscribe to this podcast if you're listening, and feel free to give us a 5-star review. We would appreciate it, and you be as free as possible. Amen.
Free 4.